Welcome to MS Research Australia's Research Report. I'm Dr. Hamish Campbell, and in this series we explore the research that's going on in Australia and around the world. In this episode, we meet Professor Bruce Taylor from the Menzies Institute for Medical Research in Tasmania. Professor Taylor is a well-known MS neurologist and researcher. Here he talks about the AusImmune Longitudinal Study, which has been running since 2003 and is exploring the environmental factors that influence the risk of developing MS. Here, Professor Taylor talks about the AusImmune Longitudinal Study in greater detail.
The AusImmune Longitudinal Study is a long-running Australian study of the effects of the environment, personal behaviours, genetics and treatment on the onset and progression of MS. Originally, we undertook a case control study of the effects of environment and personal behaviours on the onset of the first attack of MS, or the clinically isolated syndrome. We did this in 4 centres in Brisbane, Newcastle, Geelong and the Western Districts of Victoria and Tasmania. We were interested in the effects of latitude, vitamin D, sun exposure, smoking, etc. on the risk of people having that first attack of MS. Subsequently, we then took the cases from that study, the people who had their first attack of possibly MS, and have followed them now out to nearly 15 years to find out whether the same factors that made them at risk of MS were associated with the risk of developing clinically definite MS and the risk of progression of MS. What it does, the AusImmune Longitudinal Study and the AusImmune Study look at factors which are potentially modifiable. For example, smoking, sunlight exposure, vitamin D, are all things that someone can alter in their life. And if we can show that those factors are associated with the risk of getting the event, then changing those at a population level may decrease the risk of people getting MS. And certainly if those factors are also important in the progression of MS, we can then provide information for people about how they can modify their life and their lifestyle to prevent them going on and developing clinically definite MS, or if they've got it, reduce the pace at which it progresses. Well, I think it's really important that people with clinically isolated syndrome or early MS or MS at any stage look to the things that they can do to improve their outcome. And this study has emphasised how much a difference simple things, or simple in theory things, can make a lot of difference to the person's outcome. Increasing sun exposure, simply not going out and burning yourself to death, but getting a judicious amount or moderate amount of ultraviolet exposure every day. Maintaining a normal, healthy level of vitamin D, stopping smoking, reducing body mass index, increasing exercise, addressing other health complaints such as high blood pressure, type 1 or type 2 diabetes, can make, and looking at diet, these things which are all easy enough to say but sometimes difficult to do, can have a dramatic effect on the rate of progression of MS. And these are things that people can do themselves. You don't need to do anything extreme. It's what we recognise as being a normal, healthy lifestyle can make a significant difference to outcomes for people with clinically isolated syndrome or MS. This study is internationally unique because we have collected so much data on the people over such a long time. We've followed them incredibly closely, and the retention rate of the number of people who remain in the study, even out to 15 years after this event, is extraordinary. We still have over 80% of the original participants are still continuing on in the study, which is fantastic, and that's never happened anywhere internationally. And the fact that we've been able to collect such complete data on them means that we've got an unbelievable resource which is continuing, and we can answer many questions that are coming out and the questions that we're developing. So this is an internationally unique and highly regarded study. Well, we're about to commence the 15-year reviews for the people who originally enrolled in the study, and this will involve them having an interview with the study nurse and an assessment by a study neurologist, an MRI scan, and we're going to take blood, as we always do. And we are going to do something very novel at this time point, is that we're going to investigate what is called epigenetics of multiple sclerosis. We're very interested to know whether changes in the way that DNA is accessed and expressed, which is what is called epigenetics, how that will influence the risk of progression of MS, and also whether the environmental factors that we're looking at actually change that rate of epigenetic modification within the person's genome. Well, epigenetics is the study of the way that DNA, or within your chromosomes, is expressed and activated. As if you imagine your DNA code is fixed, it cannot change with time. But what your body can do is it can regulate which parts of that DNA are open and can be expressed or activated. And epigenetics basically tells us which parts of the DNA have been closed off and which parts have been opened up. And that changes with time as you age, as you're exposed to medications, as you're exposed to the environment. And we think there may be a significant link between how that epigenetics develops or evolves in a person and their risk of progression of MS. And we also think that maybe the environmental exposures such as cigarette smoking, sunlight exposure, live vitamin D may influence the way that epigenetic change occurs. The original AusImmune study was funded by the National MS Society of the United States back in 2003, and subsequently with additional support from MS Research Australia. The Auslmmune component, or the longitudinal component, has been funded at 3 time points by the National Health and Medical Research Council. And just recently, regarding the epigenetic component, we've been successful in again getting funding from the National MS Society of the United States to undertake a part of that epigenetic study. Being funded by the US MS Society is actually really very important to us, because it does indicate that this study is of international significance, that they're funding something outside of the United States, which they feel is a major international study. So it's incredibly important to get that funding.
Longitudinal studies have provided great insights into MS and will continue to do so in the future. For more information, visit our website. Also, like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future research reports. I'm Dr. Hamish Campbell, and I'll see you next time.